Have you ever thought you knew someone, truly knew them, only to discover they were living a secret life right under your nose? A life so profoundly different from the one you shared that it makes you question everything you thought was real. I thought I knew my wife, Ilara. I thought our life was an open book. We had a home, a son we adored, and a quiet, predictable rhythm. But that rhythm had been broken. It started with a whisper, a shadow in the hallway after midnight. Every night, for the past 3 months, Ilara would wait until she thought I was asleep. The floorboards outside our bedroom would creak, a sound so faint I first thought it was the house settling. But it was her. I would lie there, eyes clenched shut, listening to her soft footsteps move down the hall, pausing at our son Leo's door. The handle would turn with an agonizing slowness, a click so soft it was more felt than heard. Then, silence. 4 hours. She would stay in his room, a ghost in the house of our shared life, and return to our bed just before dawn, her side of the sheets cold, her body carrying a scent of clay and something faintly sweet, like dried herbs. She was exhausted, her eyes ringed with purple shadows that her makeup couldn't hide. When I asked her if she was all right, she would just smile, a tired, brittle thing, and say, "Just having trouble sleeping, Mark. Don't worry about me," but I did worry. My mind, a place of spreadsheets and market projections, began to run its own dark calculations. The trust one had built my world upon began to fracture, hairline cracks spreading through the foundation of our marriage. Who was this woman who shared my bed, but kept her nights locked away from me? What was she doing in our son's room? The questions festered, turning my love into a knot of suspicion and fear. I had to know. I had to see what was happening in the dark, in the one part of our life she had walled off from me. And so, with a heart heavy with guilt and a desperate need for an answer, I bought a hidden camera. It was a betrayal, I knew that. A violation of the very trust one was trying to reclaim. But her secret had become a chasm between us, and I was terrified of what I might find if I tried to leap across it without knowing how deep it was. I was a man standing on the edge of a cliff, and the only way to see the bottom was to send a spy. Our son, Leo, was the epicenter of our world, and now, the epicenter of this mystery. He was 8 years old, a boy with a mind like a sky full of shooting stars, brilliant, chaotic, and moving too fast for anyone to catch. School had become a battlefield for him. The words on the page would dance and jumble, letters swapping places like mischievous sprites. His teachers used clinical, sterile terms, dyslexia, attentional deficits. They gave us pamphlets with stock photos of smiling children and lists of strategies that felt like trying to catch a river in a sieve. His latest teacher, Mrs. Albright, was a woman who seemed to be forged from chalk dust and disappointment. In our last parent-teacher conference, she had pushed his test scores across the table, a flotilla of red ink on a sea of white. "Leo is a bright boy, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," she'd said, her tone suggesting the opposite. "But he simply isn't applying himself. The effort isn't there." I watched Ilara's hands clench in her lap. She had tried to explain. "It's not about effort," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "The information isn't connecting for him in the way you are presenting it. He sees the world differently. He needs a different key to unlock the door." Mrs. Albright had given a thin, condescending smile. "We have a curriculum that has been proven effective for hundreds of children. Perhaps if you reinforced our methods at home, instead of encouraging his creative distractions. That's what she called the intricate worlds Leo built from cardboard boxes, the stories he would tell about the secret lives of insects, the way he could understand the complex mechanics of a clock, but couldn't spell the word what. I felt a surge of anger, but I was a man who solved problems with logic and process, and this was a problem of the heart, a realm I was increasingly unfamiliar with. I left that meeting feeling utterly powerless, a failure as a father. I saw the same despair mirrored in Ilara's eyes, but where my despair hardened into a shell of frustration, hers seemed to be fueling something else. Something secret. It was after that meeting that her nightly visits to Leo's room began. It was as if she had decided that the world's keys wouldn't work for our son, so she had to forge a new one herself, in the dead of night, using tools no one else could see. But all I saw was the secrecy, the exhaustion, the distance growing between us. I saw a wife pulling away, retreating into a world I wasn't allowed to enter, and my love, poisoned by fear, started to curdle into suspicion. I was losing my wife, and I was losing my son, and I felt like I was standing by and just watching it happen. The camera felt like my only move, a desperate, ugly play in a game I didn't understand. The small signs began to accumulate, becoming a pile of evidence my logical mind couldn't ignore. At first, it was just the exhaustion, the way Alara would drift through our morning routine like a phantom. But then other things started to appear, strange artifacts in our meticulously kept home. I found a bag of fine, colored sand hidden in the back of the pantry, behind the emergency supply of canned beans. When I asked her about it, she waved a dismissive hand. Oh, that. Just a craft project I was thinking about, but she never did any craft projects. Her hands, which I had always loved for their gentleness, were now often stained with faint traces of blue or green ink, and she would quickly hide them when she saw me looking. Then came the smells. Our house, which usually smelled of lemon cleaner and fresh laundry, began to carry strange, exotic scents. One evening, a distinct aroma of cinnamon and something earthy, like damp soil, drifted from the laundry room. I found her there, hunched over the washing machine, stuffing a load of dark towels inside. She jumped when she saw me, her hand going to her chest. "Mark! You scared me. What's that smell?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Spilled some spices while I was trying a new recipe," she said quickly, a little too quickly. It was a disaster, but there was no new recipe for dinner that night, just the simple pasta we always had on Tuesdays. My mind started to build a terrible narrative. The secrecy, the exhaustion, the late nights. I would watch her on her phone, a small, secret smile playing on her lips, and she would angle the screen away if I came too close. My heart would pound with a cold, sickening dread. Was there someone else? Was this elaborate nightly ritual a cover for something I couldn't bear to imagine? The thought was a physical pain, a hot poker in my gut. I loved this woman with every fiber of my being. She was my anchor, my true north. The idea that she could be unfaithful felt like a betrayal not just of our vows, but of reality itself. And yet, the evidence, filtered through my fear, pointed to a terrible conclusion. She was lying to me. She was hiding something big. The visits to Leo's room became the focal point of my obsession. Why there? It made no sense. It was the one detail that didn't fit the sordid picture my imagination was painting. Unless it was part of the deception, a clever misdirection. I tried to bring it up one night, as we lay in bed, a canyon of cool sheets between us. "You've been checking on Leo a lot," I said, my voice sounding strained in the darkness. She stiffened beside me. "He has nightmares sometimes. I just want to make sure he's okay for 3 hours, Alara." The words were sharper than I intended. She was silent for a long time. Then she turned away from me. "I'm just being a mother, Mark." Her voice was cold, defensive. It was the first time she had ever used that tone with me, as if I were an outsider, an interrogator. That was the night I made the final decision. The conversation, if you could call it that, had built another brick in the wall between us. I couldn't ask, because she wouldn't tell. I couldn't trust, because the secrecy had burned away the very ground trust was built on. My only option, I told myself, was to see. I needed proof, one way or the other. I needed to tear down the wall, even if it meant destroying everything to do it. The next day, I left work early and went to an electronics store, my stomach churning with self-loathing. The camera was tiny, no bigger than a thumbnail, disguised as a USB charger. A spy's tool. I felt like a villain in my own life story. Installing it was the hardest part. Leo's room was his sanctuary, a colorful, chaotic kingdom of Lego castles and hand-drawn maps of imaginary worlds. It felt like a desecration to plant this seed of suspicion in his space. I plugged it into the wall outlet opposite his bed, its tiny lens having a clear view of the entire room, including the door. My hands trembled as I synced it to my phone. I was crossing a line, a point of no return. The old Mark, the husband who trusted his wife implicitly, was gone. In his place was this new, suspicious man, a man who spied on his own family. The guilt was a heavy cloak, but the desperate need to know was a fire beneath it, propelling me forward. That night, I pretended to be asleep, my body rigid with anticipation. I felt Alara stir beside me, the familiar rustle of the duvet. I heard her soft breathing as she stood by the bed, checking to see if I was truly out. My heart hammered against my ribs. Then, the creak of the floorboards, the soft click of our bedroom door, and the faint, familiar footsteps down the hall. I waited a full 10 minutes, my mind racing, before I slowly, carefully, reached for my phone. My thumb hovered over the app icon, a little stylized eye that seemed to mock me. This was it. The truth, for better or worse. I opened the live feed. The camera's night vision cast the room in a ghostly, monochromatic glow. The image was grainy, surreal. Leo was a small lump under his dinosaur-themed comforter, fast asleep. The room was still. And then, the door opened. A silhouette appeared, a figure I knew as well as my own. Alara. She slipped into the room and closed the door behind her without a sound. She didn't go to Leo's bed. She didn't check on him, didn't kiss his forehead. Instead, she knelt on the floor, in the center of the room, and began to unpack a large, canvas bag she had carried in with her. My breath caught in my throat. This was not what I expected. There was no phone call, no hushed conversation with a secret lover. There was only my wife, alone in our son's room. From the bag, she pulled out rolls of colored yarn, pieces of felt in different shapes, and small, wooden blocks. Then came stranger things. A shallow tray filled with sand, a set of small bowls containing what looked like spices or powders, and several oddly shaped pieces of textured fabric. My mind reeled. What was she doing? It looked like the preparations for some strange, silent ritual. She worked with an intense, focused energy. Her movements were precise, deliberate. She laid the yarn on the floor, not randomly, but in intricate, sweeping patterns that flowed around the furniture. She placed the felt shapes along the lines of yarn, creating what looked like a vibrant, three-dimensional map. She took a small piece of sandpaper and began to cut it into the shape of a letter B. Then she took a piece of smooth, cool velvet and cut out the same shape. She wasn't just working, she was creating. She was building something. For nearly 3 hours, I watched, mesmerized and utterly confused. She never made a sound above a whisper to herself, a low murmur of concentration. She arranged the sand tray and, using her finger, drew a perfect, flowing number 5. Next to it, she placed 5 smooth, gray stones she pulled from a soft pouch. She opened one of the bowls, and even through the phone, I could almost smell the sharp, clean scent of pine as she sprinkled some of the needles onto a felt circle. I saw her face, illuminated by the dim nightlight. There was no malice there, no deceit. Just an expression of profound concentration, and underneath it, a deep, abiding love. The exhaustion was there, yes, but it was the weariness of a master craftsman at the end of a long day's work, not the fatigue of a liar. When she was finished, the floor of Leo's room was no longer a floor. It was a landscape of texture, color, and meaning. It was a world. She stood up, her back aching, and looked over her creation with a small, satisfied sigh. Then, she quietly packed her empty bag, slipped out of the room, and was gone. I lay in the darkness, the phone screen gone black, my mind a whirlwind. The fear, the suspicion, the ugly narrative of betrayal, it all evaporated, replaced by a single, overwhelming emotion, awe. I hadn't uncovered an affair. I had stumbled upon a secret laboratory of love. The next night, I watched again, this time not as a suspicious husband, but as a student. I saw the method in her madness. The world she built was a physical manifestation of the lessons Leo was struggling with at school. The yarn map wasn't just a pattern, it was a sentence diagram. The nouns were fuzzy felt circles, the verbs were sharp, angular triangles. The sandpaper bee and the velvet bee were for him to trace, to feel the difference, to learn the shape not just with his eyes, but with his hands. The number 5 in the sand tray, next to the 5 stones, wasn't just math, it was a tangible, sensory experience of quantity. She was bypassing the parts of his brain that were getting stuck and creating new pathways for learning. She was translating the abstract, frustrating world of letters and numbers into a language his unique mind could understand, the language of touch, scent, and sight. She was teaching him grammar through geography, mathematics through geology. One night, she was working on spelling. For the word light, she laid out 5 clear crystals she had polished herself. Then, she took a small, battery-powered flashlight and shined it through the crystals, casting a tiny, fractured rainbow on the wall. Light. It wasn't just a word, it was an experience. She was connecting the symbolic to the physical, anchoring the floating, confusing letters to the real, beautiful world. I thought back to the parent-teacher conference, to Alara's quiet insistence, he needs a different key to unlock the door. I had nodded along, supportive but ultimately clueless. I didn't realize she wasn't just suggesting it. She was going home every night to forge that key from scratch, with her own 2 hands, fueled by coffee and a mother's fierce, unstoppable love. I began to piece together the clues I had so horribly misinterpreted. The colored sand was for his tactile number tray. The strange smells were part of her scent-based vocabulary system, cinnamon for words related to home, pine for words about nature. The late-night phone use wasn't a secret lover. I zoomed in on the footage one night, and saw she was watching university-level lectures on neurolinguistic programming and alternative education theories. She was re-educating herself in the dark, becoming an expert in the field of our sun. The weight of my guilt was crushing. I had imagined the worst of this incredible woman, this warrior, who was fighting a silent, lonely battle for our son's mind while I was busy feeling sorry for myself and nursing my pathetic, unfounded suspicions. She had asked for nothing, no help, no recognition. She had simply seen a problem, a child who was drowning in a world that didn't make sense to him, and she had decided to build him a life raft, one secret, exhausting night at a time. I was ashamed of the man I had been, the man who had planted the camera. But I was also profoundly grateful for what it had shown me. It had revealed not my wife's infidelity, but her genius. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I could never look at her the same way again. I had married a good woman. I was living with a great one. The change in Leo wasn't instantaneous, but it was undeniable. It started with his mornings. Before, waking him up for school was like trying to raise a ship from the bottom of the ocean. He was sullen, anxious, and filled with a dread that was palpable. Now, he would wake up and the first thing he would do was explore the night magic, as he started calling it. He never questioned where it came from. To his 8-year-old mind, it was simply a gift the world had left for him while he slept. I would watch him from the doorway, my heart in my throat, as he traced the sandpaper letters with his fingertips, his lips silently forming the sounds. He would rearrange the felt shapes, telling himself a story, unknowingly practicing his sentence structure. He would count the smooth, grey stones, dropping them one by one into the palm of his hand, feeling their weight and their reality. The frustration that had been a constant cloud over him began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet confidence. He stopped saying "I can't," he started asking "What's this?" He began to see learning not as a punishment, but as a game, a puzzle, a discovery. His laughter, which had become a rare and precious commodity in our house, started to echo through the halls again. At school, the transformation was even more startling. We received a note from his art teacher first. "Leo's understanding of spatial relationships and color theory has become remarkably sophisticated," it read. Of course it had. He was living inside a work of art every night. Then, a call from his math teacher. "I don't know what you're doing at home," she said, her voice filled with genuine surprise, but Leo just explained multiplication to another student using a handful of pebbles from the playground. It was the clearest explanation I've ever heard, my eyes filled with tears as I hung up the phone. I looked across the living room at Alara, who was mending a tear in Leo's favorite jeans, her face etched with a familiar exhaustion. She had no idea. She was getting no credit. She was the hidden engine driving this incredible change, and no one, not even her own husband, had bothered to see her. A fierce, protective love for her swelled in my chest. I wanted to shout her brilliance from the rooftops. I wanted to wrap her in my arms and tell her I knew, that I saw everything. But I couldn't. How could I confess? How could I admit that my discovery of her beautiful secret was born from my own ugly suspicion? The camera was still there, a toxic little secret of my own. So I kept watching, my role shifting from spy to silent guardian, an archivist of her nightly miracles. I watched her build a solar system on the floor with glowing paint so he could learn the planets. I watched her create a river of time with a long blue silk scarf, placing historical figures along its banks. I was witnessing a masterpiece being created, a mother's love being translated into a new form of science. The only person who remained unconvinced was Mrs. Albright. To her, Leo's progress was not a miracle, it was a red flag. It was too fast, too unconventional. It didn't fit within the neat, predictable boxes of her curriculum. She started sending home notes questioning whether we were doing his homework for him. She would call him to her desk and quiz him, searching for the cracks in his newfound knowledge, refusing to believe it was real. Her skepticism was a constant, grating presence, a reminder that the world was not ready for the kind of magic Alara was making. Then came the email that I had been dreading and, in a way, anticipating. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," it began, the tone already cold and formal. "I am writing to request a mandatory meeting to discuss Leo's recent academic performance. There are some serious irregularities that we need to address. Please be at my classroom tomorrow at 4 p.m. The principal, Ms. Evans, will also be in attendance." The word irregularities felt like an accusation. Mrs. Albright wasn't celebrating Leo's breakthrough, she was investigating it as a crime. I read the email to Alara, and I saw the light in her eyes dim. The quiet confidence she had been building was shaken. "What does she mean?" she whispered, her hands twisting in her lap. "Does she think we are cheating?" I looked at my wife, this brilliant, tireless woman, and I saw her starting to crumble under the weight of a system that was designed to crush anyone who didn't conform. And in that moment, I knew I could not stay silent any longer. My secret was a poison, but her secret was a cure. It was time for the cure to be brought into the light, even if it meant exposing my own sickness. "Don't worry," I said, taking her hand. My voice was filled with a conviction that surprised us both. "I'll handle it. I'll go to the meeting. I'll make them understand." She looked at me, her eyes searching my face. She didn't know the whole truth, but she could feel a shift in my resolve. For the first time in months, I wasn't the disconnected, frustrated husband. I was her partner. I was on her team. That night, after she slipped into Leo's room, I didn't just watch on my phone. I went to the hall closet and pulled out my professional camera, the one I used for corporate headshots. I attached a telephoto lens and, for an hour, I stayed up and took pictures. I documented her work, not with the grainy, clandestine eye of a spy camera, but with the clear, respectful lens of an artist. I captured the intricate yarn sentences, the tactile sandpaper letters, the rainbow cast by the crystals. I was building my own body of evidence. The next day, I walked into Mrs. Albright's classroom feeling a strange calm. The room was just as I remembered it, sterile, orderly, and joyless. Mrs. Albright sat behind her desk, a grim sentinel of the status quo. Beside her sat the principal, Miss Evans, a woman with tired but intelligent eyes. Mrs. Albright began without preamble, laying out Leo's recent tests on the desk. The scores were near perfect. As you can see, she said, her voice dripping with insinuation, Leo has made what can only be described as a miraculous recovery. His scores have jumped 3 grade levels in 2 months. Frankly, it's not plausible. I let her finish. I listened as she outlined her theory that we, the parents, were completing his assignments, that we were feeding him answers, that we were undermining the entire educational process. Ms. Evans listened patiently, her expression unreadable. When the tide of accusation finally subsided, the room was silent. "Are you finished?" I asked quietly. Mrs. Albright nodded, looking smug. "Then let me explain," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get angry. I simply opened my briefcase and took out a folder. It was filled with the high-resolution photographs I had taken the night before. I laid them on the desk, one by one. "You're right," I began, my voice steady. "Leo's progress is miraculous. But it has nothing to do with cheating. It has to do with this." I tapped the first photo, a wide shot of Leo's bedroom floor, transformed into a vibrant learning landscape. "You see, Mrs. Albright, you told my wife that Leo needed to try harder. You told her that your methods were proven. But you were wrong. Your methods were proven for a certain kind of mind. My son has a different kind of mind. And my wife, my brilliant, incredible wife, understood that. She knew he didn't need to try harder, he needed to be taught differently." I walked them through each photograph. I explained the sandpaper letters, the yarn grammar, the scent-based vocabulary. I described the flashlight casting rainbows to teach the word light. I explained the hours, the exhaustion, the relentless dedication it took for Alara to build a new world for our son every single night, a world where he could finally learn. As I spoke, I could see Mrs. Albright's smugness curdle into disbelief, then into a pale, tight-lipped anger. She saw her authority, her entire worldview, being dismantled by a homemaker with a bag of felt and some spices. But Miss Evans, the principal, was leaning forward, her eyes wide with fascination. She picked up a photo of the sentence map. "This is incredible," she murmured, tracing the yarn path with her finger. "This is applied neurolinguistics. It's multisensory integration. Where did your wife learn to do this?" "She taught herself," I said, my voice thick with pride. "She did it because she's a mother, and she saw her son was hurting, and she refused to let him fail." Mrs. Albright finally spoke, her voice strained. "This is highly irregular. It's not part of the approved curriculum. We can't have parents inventing their own teaching methods." "Why not?" Ms. Evans shot back, her gaze sharp as she turned to the teacher. "Why not, if the methods work? Your job is to teach the child, not the curriculum. Look at these results." She gestured to the test papers, then back to my photos. "The curriculum is a tool, not a cage. Mrs. Thompson hasn't undermined our process, she has created a new one, a better one for her son. I don't see a problem here. I see a solution. In fact, I'd very much like to meet your wife, Mr. Thompson. I think she has a lot she could teach us." The meeting ended with Mrs. Albright speechless, and Miss Evans asking for my phone number. I walked out of that school not just as a father, but as a champion for my wife's hidden genius. I had walked in to defend my son from an accusation of cheating. I walked out having established his mother as a pioneer in education. The drive home was a blur. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with an exhilarating sense of purpose. I had done it. I had given her a voice. That night, when Alara came to bed, I was waiting. I didn't have my phone in my hand. I had the prints of the photographs I had shown the principal, spread out on the comforter. She stopped in the doorway, her eyes going from the photos to my face. She saw the sandpaper bee, the yarn river, the crystal light. She saw her secret world laid bare. Her face paled. "Mark." "How?" "I know," I said softly. "I know everything," and then, the hardest part. I told her about the camera. I told her about my fear, my suspicion, the ugly story I had built in my head. I told her how I had betrayed her trust because I was too weak and too scared to have faith. I didn't make excuses. I just laid my own pathetic, broken truth out next to her beautiful one. Her eyes filled with tears, and my heart broke. But they weren't just tears of anger. They were tears of hurt, of exhaustion, of a profound, lonely struggle finally being seen. You thought I was having an affair," she whispered, the absurdity of it mixing with the pain. "I'm so sorry, Alara," I said, my own voice cracking. "I am so sorry. It was a monstrous thing to think, a monstrous thing to do. But then I saw you. Not the wife I thought I knew, but this force of nature. This genius. And I have never been more in awe of you in my entire life." She was quiet for a long time, the silence stretching between us. Then, she reached out and picked up the photo of the sandpaper bee. "You took these?" "Last night," I said. "I showed them to the principal today." I told her about the meeting. About Mrs. Albright's fury and Miss Evans's awe. I told her the principal wanted to meet her, to learn from her. A single tear rolled down her cheek and splashed onto the photograph. She looked up at me, her gaze clear and deep. "You defended me. I will spend the rest of my life defending you," I said, and I meant it. "And celebrating you." She didn't forgive me right away. Trust, once broken, doesn't heal in an instant. But that night, for the first time in months, she fell asleep in my arms. There was no secret trip down the hall. We just held each other, and in the quiet of our bedroom, a new foundation began to set. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Alara met with Ms. Evans. She was nervous at first, a quiet homemaker thrust into the world of professional educators. But when she started talking about Leo, about how his mind worked, her passion and brilliance were undeniable. They started a pilot program at the school, a sensory learning workshop, for other kids who were struggling. Alara, the woman who thought she was just a mom, was now training teachers, her methods, once a secret, now a source of hope for dozens of families. Mrs. Albright put in for a transfer to another school district. Our marriage healed, slowly but surely. It was stronger now, forged in the fire of a terrible mistake and a beautiful revelation. I never stopped being sorry for the camera, but I was eternally grateful for what it showed me. It taught me that the people we love have entire worlds inside them we may never see unless we are forced to. So I ask you again, do you truly know the people you love? Do you see the quiet sacrifices, the invisible work, the secret genius that might be unfolding just on the other side of a closed door? Look closer. Ask the questions you are afraid to ask. Because sometimes, the greatest treasures are hidden in plain sight, in the people we think we know best. Don't wait for a moment of suspicion to force you to see. Choose to see now. Remind someone in your life that you see their magic, even when they perform it in the dark. Share this story if you believe in the power of that hidden, everyday heroism. Because in a world that so often celebrates the loud and the obvious, it's the quiet, tireless love that truly has the power to change everything.